A struggling farmer finds an injured pilot in his field, only to learn she's a millionaire. What happens when a desperate farmer shelters a hunted heiress who literally falls from the sky? Just wait until you hear the jaw-dropping twist about the real reason her plane was targeted, revealing a danger far closer than either of them suspected. Don't miss the Everstone crash. Subscribe, like, and listen now to uncover the full, shocking story. The scream of tearing metal ripped through the already howling wind and rain. Jake Riley flinched, pulling his collar tighter against the Montana deluge, soaking his worn flannel shirt. He'd been checking the southern fence line, a nightly ritual since the bank started making noises, worried about losing even one head of cattle. Then came a sound not thunder, too high-pitched, too wrong. It was followed by a sickening thump that vibrated through the muddy ground beneath his boots, somewhere out past the creek bed, deep in his lower pasture. White light flashed erratically against the bruised purple sky, followed by an oily black plume snaking upwards, momentarily visible even through the downpour. No hesitation. Training, instinct, maybe just the desperate monotony of his life demanding something happen, propelled him forward. He half ran, half slid down the slick incline towards the source. The smell hit him, first acrid jet fuel and burning electrical wire, sharp and sickening. Then he saw it, the mangled fuselage of a small, sleek aircraft, nose down in the mud. One wing sheared clean off, the other crumpled like foil. Flames licked at the engine cowling, spitting angrily against the relentless rain. The cockpit canopy was shattered. Inside, slumped against the controls, was a figure. Female, dark hair plastered across a face deathly pale, save for the crimson stream trickling from her temple. Jake wrenched at the buckled door, metal groaning in protest until it gave. Rainwater sluiced into the cramped space. He reached in, his hands clumsy but urgent, fumbling with the safety harness. The woman moaned, a low, incoherent sound. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, unfocused, filled with a terror that went beyond the crash itself. "No, no hospital," she breathed, the words barely audible over the storm and the crackle of flames. "Please." Her eyes rolled back, and she went limp, ignoring the fire creeping closer, ignoring the impossibility of all. Jake eased her out of the wreckage. She was lighter than he expected. He shrugged off his soaked shirt, wrapping it gently around her bleeding head, then scooped her into his arms. The mud sucked at his boots as he turned back towards the distant, solitary light of his farmhouse. The unconscious woman a fragile weight against his chest, the storm raging around them, and 1,000 unspoken questions screaming louder than the wind. What in God's name had just fallen out of the sky and into his already collapsing world? Jake Riley's world was measured in acres, seasons, and debt. 300 acres of Montana rangeland, nestled in a valley that was beautiful in the summer sun, but unforgiving under winter snow or spring storms like tonight's. It was land his grandfather had homesteaded, land his father had nearly lost, and land Jake was now fighting tooth and nail to keep. The First National Bank of Stillwater held the note, and Mr. Henderson, the loan officer with his sympathetic frown and unwavering deadlines, had made it clear the grace period was over. The cattle market was down, feed costs were up, and the repairs needed on the ancient tractor and failing irrigation pump were laughably beyond his means. At 36, Jake wore the land on his face, lines etched by sun and worry around his clear blue eyes, calluses thick on his hands. He wasn't prone to flights of fancy. His days were a relentless cycle, pre-dawn chores, mending fences, tending the small herd, crunching numbers that never added up, falling into bed exhausted, only to wake and do it again. His social life consisted of nodding to neighbors at the feed store in town 20 miles away and the occasional awkward beer with old high school acquaintances who mostly talked about moving away. He was competent, quiet, deeply tied to this place, yet increasingly suffocated by it. The weight of legacy and the shame of potential failure pressed down harder than any physical labor. His father had died 5 years prior, a heart attack brought on, Jake suspected, by the same financial stress now strangling him. His mother lived in Arizona, remarried, and gently suggested he sell up and start fresh, advice that felt like a betrayal of everything his father had worked for. Jake was stubborn, maybe foolishly so. Selling felt like admitting defeat, not just for himself, but for his family's history carved into this very soil. The valley itself reflected Jake's situation. Once dotted with thriving family ranches, it was slowly succumbing to economic pressure. Some neighbors had sold out to larger agricultural corporations. Others had subdivided for wealthy out-of-staters seeking vacation homes, changing the character of the community. There was a simmering tension between the old ways and the new money, between survival and surrender. Pickup trucks shared the road with gleaming SUVs, and a local diner served biscuits and gravy alongside artisanal lattes. Jake's farmhouse was old but solid, maintained with care but showing its age. The furniture was worn, the linoleum cracked, the Wi-Fi spotty at best. It was a place of routine, of predictable hardship. The sudden, violent intrusion of a plane crash wasn't just unexpected. It was fundamentally alien to the rhythm of his existence. As he carried the unconscious woman across his threshold, laying her gently on the threadbare couch near the wood stove, the stark contrast between his world and whatever world she had fallen from was palpable. He was a man clinging to the edge by his fingernails, and now, inexplicably, he held the life of a stranger from the sky in his hands, a stranger who didn't want the authorities involved, adding a layer of dangerous mystery to his already precarious life. The rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside him. The inciting incident wasn't just the crash itself, but the conscious choice Jake made in its immediate aftermath. Laying the woman barely older than himself, maybe early 30s on the couch, the scent of rain, mud, and now antiseptic from his meager first aid kit filled the small living room. He'd managed to clean the gash on her forehead. It was deep, definitely needing stitches, but the bleeding had slowed to an ooze. Her pulse was thready but stable, her breathing shallow. His high school first aid course felt woefully inadequate. Every instinct screamed to call 911. An ambulance, the sheriff, the FAA, this was an aircraft accident, protocol demanded it. But her whispered plea echoed, "No, no hospital. Please." He hesitated, torn. Was she delirious? Running from something? The expensive, non-standard pilot watch visible on her wrist, even caked in mud, and the fine quality of her leather boots, now ruined, didn't fit the profile of a typical bush pilot navigating Montana airspace in a storm. He looked from her pale face to the phone hanging on the kitchen wall, then back again. Calling for help was the right thing to do, the safe thing to do. But her fear felt genuine, primal. And perhaps a darker thought surfaced, involving the authorities meant official reports, questions he might not want to answer, attention drawn to his already vulnerable situation. What if the plane caused damage he couldn't afford to fix? What if this somehow complicated things with the bank? He made a decision, rationalized partly by her plea, partly by a flicker of defiance against the orderly, crushing weight of his obligations. He wouldn't call. Not yet. He needed to understand. He needed her to wake up. His immediate goal formed. Keep her stable, keep her hidden, and figure out who she was and why she crashed on his land begging for secrecy. He banked the fire in the wood stove, found spare blankets, and made her as comfortable as possible. He checked her pulse again, relieved it felt a fraction stronger. Then, grabbing his heaviest rain slicker and a flashlight, he went back out into the storm. He couldn't hide the fuselage. Not really, but he used his old tractor and chains to drag the largest pieces of debris, the sheared wing, buckled panels under the dense cover of a pine, stand near the creek. He kicked mud and scattered branches over the worst of the impact gouges in the pasture. It was a temporary measure at best, easily discovered by any serious search party, but it bought time. Back inside, soaked and shivering, he sat in the worn armchair opposite the couch, watching her breathe. Fear warred with a strange sense of responsibility and an undeniable current of adrenaline he hadn't felt in years. He was way out his depth. He knew ranching, not espionage or fugitive care. His reaction was a mix of grim determination and profound anxiety. He had actively chosen to step outside the bounds of normalcy to harbor a secret. He listened to the rain, the ticking clock, the woman's quiet breathing, and wondered if he'd just saved a life or destroyed his own. The only certainty was that his ordinary world had shattered as surely as the plane's cockpit, and there was no going back. Days blurred into a tense routine. Jake divided his time between essential farm chores, milking the few cows, feeding the chickens, checking the herd, and tending to his unexpected guest. He introduced himself simply as Jake. She, regaining consciousness slowly, offered the name Sarah Miller. Her voice was weak, her eyes wary. She claimed partial amnesia from the crash, remembering her name but little else, conveniently explaining her lack of details and her aversion to hospitals. A phobia, she murmured. Jake didn't buy it, not entirely. The sharpness in her gaze, even clouded by pain and medication. He'd managed to get some stronger antibiotics and pain relief from a sympathetic, discreet old vet in the next county, claiming an animal injury, suggested a mind working hard behind the facade. He treated her injuries as best he could. The head wound was knitting together slowly, cleaned and bandaged daily. He suspected a concussion and possibly cracked ribs from the harness, judging by the pain in her breathing. He brought her broth, water, bread. They spoke little. The silences were heavy with unspoken questions. Jake found himself observing her constantly. The way she held herself, even weakened. The precision in her few movements. The expensive watch was a Patek Philippe he discovered via a surreptitious search on his slow satellite internet, worth more than his entire herd. Definitely not Sarah Miller, average pilot. The first major complication arrived 3 days after the crash, in the form of Deputy Evans' patrol car crunching up the gravel driveway. Evans was young, generally easygoing, but thorough. "Morning, Jake," he called out, shielding his eyes from the weak sun that had finally broken through. "Just doing rounds. Had some reports of a low-flying aircraft out this way during that big storm Tuesday night. Didn't see or hear anything, did ya?" Jake's heart hammered. He leaned against the porch railing, forcing casualness. "Heard the storm. All right," he said, managing a dry chuckle. Sounded like the sky was falling. Didn't see any planes, though. Too busy trying to keep the roof on. He held Evans' gaze, praying his lie sounded convincing. Evans nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the property, lingering for a moment on the dense pine stand near the creek. "Alrighty then. Just checking. Let us know if anything washes up." He drove away, leaving Jake sweating despite the cool air. He knew Evans. The deputy might not have bought it completely. The second complication was medical. Sarah's fever spiked, and she became delirious, muttering fragments about data, servers, and a name Marcus. Her condition was worsening beyond his ability to manage. The vet's antibiotics weren't cutting it for what was likely a secondary infection. The need for proper medical care became critical, directly challenging her insistence on secrecy. Just as Jake was wrestling with the decision to override her wishes and drive her to the clinic in Bozeman, risking exposure, the third, most dangerous complication arrived. A black SUV, utterly out of place on his dirt road, rolled to a stop blocking the driveway. Two men got out, dressed in dark, expensive suits that screamed city and trouble. They moved with an unnerving confidence, scanning the farmhouse and outbuildings. One, tall and severe-looking, approached the porch where Jake stood, barring the door. "We're looking for a friend," the man said, his voice smooth but cold. "Sarah Miller. We believe she might have had an accident nearby. We're here to take her home." Before Jake could respond, Sarah's voice, surprisingly strong, came from just inside the door. "They're not my friends, Jake." He felt her hand grip his forearm weakly but urgently. "Don't let them take me." Jake planted his feet. He was outnumbered, outclassed, and terrified, but standing on his own land, protecting someone under his roof, triggered something primal. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is private property. You need to leave." The men exchanged glances. The tall one smiled, a humorless baring of teeth. "We can do this the easy way, farmer, or the hard way." The confrontation had arrived, escalating the situation from passive hiding to active defense. Jake had no plan, only the flimsy shield of property rights and a growing, desperate resolve. The standoff on the porch was broken not by violence, but by calculation. The severe-looking man, likely sizing Jake up as more stubborn than dangerous, held up his hands in mock surrender. "All right, farmer. No need for trouble. We just want to ensure Ms. Miller is okay. Perhaps we could speak with her directly?" Jake hesitated, but Sarah's voice came again, firmer now. "Let them see I'm alive. Then make them leave." Reluctantly, Jake stepped aside just enough for the men to see Sarah standing weakly in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, her face pale but defiant. "Sarah, thank God," the second man, shorter and stockier, said with false relief. "Your cousin Marcus has been worried sick. Let's take you home, get you proper care." The name Marcus, the one she'd muttered in her delirium, hung in the air. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Tell Marcus," she said, her voice clear and cold despite her obvious frailty, "that his concern is touching but unnecessary. I'm fine here. Now leave." The men's facade dropped. The tall one's eyes hardened. "Ms. Vance," he said, the name landing like a physical blow. "Don't make this difficult. Mr. Vance insists." "Vance." The name clicked obscurely in Jake's mind. Vance Aerospace? The massive corporation headquartered back east? He looked at Sarah Eleanor Vance, apparently seeing her now not just as a victim, but as someone playing a very dangerous game. The men took a step forward, menace radiating from them. Before Jake could react, Eleanor swayed, clutching her head with a genuine cry of pain, her strength failing. Seeing her sudden vulnerability, the men exchanged a look and decided to press their advantage. But just as they moved, the distant but distinct sound of Deputy Evans' patrol car siren became audible, growing steadily closer. Evans must have doubled back, his suspicions aroused earlier. The two men froze, cursed under their breath, shot Jake and Eleanor a final, venomous look, then retreated quickly to their SUV and sped away, kicking up gravel. Evans arrived moments later, seeing only the departing vehicle. "Everything all right here, Jake?" "Saw that SUV tear out of here like a bat out of hell." Jake, heart pounding, forced another calm facade. "Just some lost city folk asking directions. Got frustrated, I guess." Evans looked skeptical but accepted the explanation, warning Jake to call if they returned before driving off again. The immediate threat had passed, but the confrontation was a turning point. The mask was off. She was Eleanor Vance, heiress to a fortune, and clearly in mortal danger from her own family. The men weren't friends, they were hunters. Hiding was no longer enough. That evening, huddled by the fire, Eleanor told Jake the truth. She was Eleanor Vance, majority shareholder of Vance Aerospace after her father's recent death. Her cousin, Marcus Vance, head of the R&D division, had been siphoning millions through shell corporations and selling sensitive technology secrets. She discovered the evidence, encrypted files stored on a hidden server, and a physical ledger she'd secured just before her flight. Marcus knew she knew. The accident wasn't accidental. Forensic analysis of the recovered black box would likely show engine tampering designed to look like failure in the storm. Marcus wanted her dead to cover his tracks and seize full control of the company. The men were his private security detail, tasked with finding her and finishing the job. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered, looking genuinely lost for the first time. "I programmed my flight path for a small airstrip 2 counties over, hoping to disappear, contact the one person I trust. But the engine failed too soon." Jake absorbed the information, the sheer scale of it staggering. He was caught in a corporate power struggle with lethal stakes. This wasn't just his farm on the line anymore. It was their lives. "Who do you trust?" he asked quietly. "My father's former head of security," Eleanor replied. "Retired FBI, David Miller. He lives off-grid, but I have a way to contact him securely. If I can get to a safe terminal." The realization hit Jake with full force. They couldn't stay passive. Hiding her was delaying the inevitable. They had to get the evidence out, expose Marcus, and fight back. His initial goal of simply protecting her shifted. Now, they needed a plan, a way to turn the tables. He looked at Eleanor, seeing not just an heiress, but a fighter. He nodded slowly. "Okay, Eleanor Vance. Let's figure out how to get you to Miller." It was the point of no return. His quiet life was irrevocably over. The revelation hung heavy in the small farmhouse. Jake felt a cold dread mix with a strange surge of purpose. He was in over his head, harboring a billionaire heiress targeted for assassination by her own cousin. Yet, looking at Eleanor pale, injured, but with a fierce intelligence burning in her eyes, abandoning her wasn't an option. His own problems with the bank suddenly seemed trivial, though the foreclosure notice that arrived in the mail the next day served as a grim reminder of the life he was risking. Eleanor saw the notice on the kitchen table, her expression tightening with guilt and resolve. "When this is over, Jake," she said softly, "I'll help you. Whatever it takes." He just nodded, the immediate danger overshadowing future possibilities. Their first priority was contacting David Miller. Eleanor explained that using his satellite internet or her own damaged phone was too risky. Marcus likely had surveillance capabilities monitoring her known digital footprints. They needed burner phones and a public, untraceable access point. The nearest sizable town with anonymous prepaid phones and a public library was Stillwater, nearly 50 miles away. A risky trip. Marcus's men knew she was alive and likely in the area. They wouldn't have given up. They'd be searching, possibly watching the roads. Jake's knowledge of the back roads became their lifeline. He planned a circuitous route, using old logging trails and county roads that rarely saw traffic, driving his battered pickup truck, which blended in better than Eleanor's hypothetical escape vehicle. They left before dawn. Eleanor bundled in old clothes borrowed from a box of his mother's things left in the attic, a baseball cap pulled low over her bandaged forehead. The drive was nerve-wracking. Every distant pair of headlights felt like a threat. Jake's familiarity with the landscape, The way he navigated washed-out culverts and unmarked turns impressed Eleanor. It was a different kind of intelligence than she was used to, practical and grounded. In Stillwater, Jake went into a nondescript convenience store and bought 2 cheap burner phones and extra SIM cards with cash while Eleanor waited, slumped low in the truck's passenger seat. Then, at the public library, Eleanor, looking like any other patron using the computer terminals, logged into a series of anonymizing relays before accessing a secure, encrypted messaging platform she and Miller had established years ago as a contingency. She sent a coded message, Sparrow grounded. Need Raven's nest coordinates. Urgent. They waited anxiously back at the farm. Hours passed. Jake did chores mechanically, his mind racing. Eleanor rested, the trip having taken a toll on her still-recovering body. Doubt crept in. What if Miller didn't get the message? What if Marcus found them first? The isolation of the ranch, once a comfort, now felt like a trap. Late that night, one of the burner phones chirped. A simple text message, coordinates received. Await signal at 45.678 N, 110.987 W. Bring the package. Raven out. The coordinates pointed to a remote, decommissioned Forest Service airstrip about 100 miles north, accessible only by rough roads. The package, Eleanor confirmed, was the evidence primarily, the encrypted data key she had memorized, which unlocked the file she'd already uploaded to a secure dead-drop server before her flight, plus the physical ledger she'd hidden in her flight bag, which Jake had retrieved from the wreckage. Their new strategy formed. Get Eleanor and the ledger to the rendezvous point. Miller would handle extraction and delivery of the evidence to the authorities he trusted, likely bypassing potentially compromised federal channels initially. It was proactive, risky, but necessary. Complications arose immediately. A day later, while checking his fence line again, Jake spotted drone activity as small, commercial drone hovering high over the valley, too sophisticated for local hobbyists. Marcus was stepping up surveillance. They were being watched, their time running out. Then, the farm's electricity flickered and died. A deliberate act? An overload? Jake switched to his generator, but it was another sign their sanctuary was compromised. Fear, cold and sharp, settled in. They needed to move, and soon, but moving carelessly meant walking right into Marcus's hands. They were reacting, regrouping, but the enemy was closing in, forcing their hand toward a final, desperate gamble. The drone confirmed their fears. Marcus knew where Eleanor was, or at least had narrowed it down to Jake's property. The power cut felt like the tightening of a noose. Miller's instructions via secure text were clear. Hold position. Extraction team mobilizing ETA 24 hours. Avoid direct contact. Marcus is en route personally. Assume hostile intent. Marcus coming himself. That changed everything. It meant he was desperate, impatient, and likely bringing serious firepower, not just the 2 goons from before. Jake felt a surge of primal fear, but also a grim understanding. This remote Montana ranch was about to become a battleground. 24 hours felt like an eternity. Jake and Eleanor spent the next hours in frantic, hushed preparation. Their new plan wasn't about escape anymore. It was about survival until Miller's team arrived, and ensuring Eleanor could activate the final data transfer, if necessary her ultimate insurance policy. Jake locked down the farmhouse as best he could, reinforcing doors, checking the loads in his old hunting rifle and shotgun tools he usually reserved for coyotes, not men. Eleanor, despite her weakness, worked with focused intensity on Jake's sluggish laptop, connected via the generator-powered satellite dish. She was trying to access the Vance Aerospace Secure Network through layers of encryption, needing to initiate a protocol that would not only release the incriminating data to Miller's chosen recipients, but also alert specific, trusted board members simultaneously. It required stable connection and time commodities they might not have. The tension was thick enough to cut. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind, sounded like approaching footsteps. They spoke in low tones, sharing stories: Jake about his father's dreams for the farm, Eleanor about the suffocating loneliness of her corporate life, the betrayals that felt almost normal until Marcus crossed the line into lethal territory. A bond forged in shared danger and unexpected vulnerability deepened between them. As dusk bled into a moonless night, the first sign of Marcus's arrival came. Headlights sweeping across the lower pasture, cutting through the darkness. Not one vehicle, but 3 dark SUVs, moving slowly, deliberately up the access road. Jake killed the generator, plunging the farm into near-total darkness, save for the emergency battery lights inside. "He's boxing us in," Jake whispered, peering through a gap in the curtains. This was their final test. Trapped, outnumbered, with help still hours away. Doubt nodded Jake. He was just a rancher. How could he possibly stand against trained professionals? He looked at Eleanor, her face illuminated by the laptop screen, fingers flying across the keyboard, her expression a mixture of fear and fierce concentration. "Almost there, Jake," she murmured. "Just need a few more minutes." A dark night of the soul moment descended. Success seemed impossible. Surrender might mean survival, at least for him. But looking at Eleanor, at the trust in her eyes, surrender wasn't an option. He thought of his father, of the land, of the quiet dignity he was fighting for. He had to buy her those minutes. His mind raced, cataloging his resources, the layout of the farm, the outbuildings, the irrigation ditches now muddy from the recent storm, the temperamental old tractor, the herd of cattle currently penned near the barn. An idea sparked, desperate and dangerous. "Keep working," he told Eleanor, grabbing his rifle and a heavy flashlight. "I'll create a diversion. Keep them busy." He slipped out the back door, melting into the familiar darkness of his own land, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The final confrontation was about to begin. Jake moved through the darkness like a shadow, his boots silent on the damp earth. He knew every dip and rise, every fence post and patch of loose gravel. The SUVs had parked near the main gate, men fanning out, using night vision and thermal scopes, methodically approaching the farmhouse. Marcus, identifiable by his expensive coat even in the gloom, directed them from the relative safety of the vehicles. Reaching the cattle pen near the barn, Jake took a deep breath and fired his rifle into the air away from the house. The shot cracked through the night, followed instantly by the panicked bellowing of startled cattle. As Marcus's men instinctively turned towards the sound, Jake unlatched the gate. The terrified herd surged out, a wave of hoofs and horns thundering unpredictably through the darkness towards the deployed men. Chaos erupted: shouts, confusion, men scrambling to avoid being trampled. Under cover of the mayhem, Jake circled wide, making his way towards the irrigation controls near the creek bed. He twisted the valve, controlling the flow to the lower pasture, where several of Marcus's team were now trying to regroup. Water, cold and muddy, began flooding the already soft ground, turning it into a slick, impassable mire. More shouts, curses, lights skittering wildly. The diversion bought Eleanor the time she needed. Inside the farmhouse, the final encryption sequence completed. With a click, the data flew terabytes of incriminating evidence, routing through secure channels to Miller, key Vance board members, and a designated contact at the Justice Department. Simultaneously, a silent alarm, embedded in the data packet, pinged Miller's extraction team with their exact location and a confirmation code. But Marcus, furious and realizing he was losing control, broke from the SUVs and charged towards the farmhouse himself, sidearm drawn. He kicked open the front door just as Eleanor hit send. He saw her, illuminated by the laptop glow. "It's over, Ellie," he snarled, raising his weapon. Suddenly, the back door burst open. Jake stood there, rifle discarded, holding only a heavy wrench. He didn't charge. He simply stood his ground, blocking Marcus's path to Eleanor. For a moment, the two men locked eyes, the desperate rancher and the cornered executive. Before Marcus could shift his aim, sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly louder. Red and blue lights flashed at the end of the driveway. Miller's team, local sheriff's deputies among them, had arrived. Marcus hesitated, trapped between Jake, Eleanor, and the approaching law. In that split second of indecision, Jake lunged, not attacking, but knocking the laptop off the table. It crashed to the floor as Marcus fired instinctively, the shot going wide, burying itself in the wall. Deputies swarmed the house, weapons drawn. "Drop it. Hands up." Marcus, seeing the futility, slowly lowered his gun, rage contorting his features. "You," he spat at Eleanor. "You ruined everything." Eleanor met his gaze, exhausted but steady. "No, Marcus," she replied quietly. "You did." He was swiftly handcuffed and led away into the flashing lights. The aftermath was a whirlwind of flashing lights, official reports, and quiet relief. State police secured the farm, collecting evidence and Marcus's subdued henchmen. David Miller, a wiry man with sharp eyes, materialized beside Eleanor, overseeing the data verification and ensuring her safety. He clasped Jake's hand firmly. "You did good, son. Real good." As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the muddy, trampled pasture, the chaos subsided, leaving an exhausted quiet. The immediate danger was over. Marcus Vance's arrest, coupled with the irrefutable evidence Eleanor had unleashed, sent shockwaves through the financial world. Vance Aerospace's board moved swiftly, purging Marcus's allies and beginning the process of stabilization and repair under loyal leadership. Eleanor, finally safe, focused on her physical and emotional recovery. She stayed at the farm for another week while legal matters were sorted, the dynamic between her and Jake shifting from protector and protected to something quieter, more tentative. True to her word, she didn't just wave a magic wand to fix Jake's financial woes. Instead, she connected him with top-tier financial advisors and agricultural lawyers. They helped Jake restructure his debt, presenting the bank not with pleas, but with a solid, innovative business plan they developed together, transforming Riley Ranch into a high-quality, organic beef supplier, leveraging its remote location and Jake's expertise into a niche market brand. Eleanor provided seed capital as a secured loan, ensuring Jake retained ownership and pride. The farm didn't become a luxury resort overnight. The transformation was gradual, demanding hard work from Jake and smart strategy guided by Eleanor's business acumen. Within 2 years, the ranch was profitable, the bank loan was manageable, and the threat of foreclosure was a receding memory. The bond forged in crisis slowly deepened into love. They found common ground not just in the trauma they'd shared, but in their mutual respect, their quiet understanding of loss and resilience. One crisp autumn evening, standing on the hill overlooking the pasture where a plane had crashed, Jake simply took Eleanor's hand. "This place almost broke me," he said quietly. "Then you fell out of the sky." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved more than my life, Jake." No grand proposal was needed. Their commitment was unspoken but profound. They married quietly the following spring, not with fanfare, but with a gathering of Jake's neighbors and Eleanor's few trusted friends on the porch of the farmhouse. Together, they established a small foundation, funded initially by Eleanor, focused on providing legal aid and financial counseling to struggling small farms in Montana overseen by Jake. Looking out at his thriving land, Eleanor beside him, Jake knew he hadn't just found prosperity. He'd found a partnership, a shared future built not on a dramatic rescue, but on resilience, trust, and the quiet strength discovered in the heart of crisis. The sky above was clear blue, holding only promise.